I would like next to introduce Senator Martin Heinrich. I don't know if I see his tall shadow in the doorway. Is that you? Oh, good. We are so delighted to have him here. For those of you who haven't followed his career, he was in the House of Representatives from 2009 to 2013 when he was elected to the Senate. He is now the junior senator from New Mexico, serving with Tom Udall. We, as I mentioned earlier, are so grateful to have had 3 states involved in this Manhattan Project Park, New Mexico, Washington State, and Tennessee. And together they have given us a dozen or more over the course of the last 10, 15 years, people who have been dedicated to trying to make this park a reality. And there is no one who I think embodies greater vigor and determination and was more instrumental in the waning days of Congress than Senator Heinrich. So we're very delighted to welcome him here.
I want to thank Cindy for that kind introduction and for all of her leadership. And I really want to thank the Atomic Heritage Foundation staff and advisors and directors and all the volunteers who organized this week's events for bringing everyone here today for what really is, for many of us, a very special occasion. And I'd like to say to all the veterans and their families who are here as well, to thank you for your service to this great nation. My own father was actually a Navy sailor who saw several of the early nuclear tests after the Manhattan Project, but in the Marshall Islands. And one of the things I'll always remain committed to is making sure that those contributions, those of all our veterans, but in particular our atomic veterans, are written into the history of our country as we move forward. It's a real honor to join you today, and as you know, the Manhattan Project began as a very secret mission to develop an atomic weapon before Nazi Germany could, and to bring an end to World War II. And it reflects the entire diversity of the American experience when you think about the fact that more than 600,000 individuals were involved or worked on the project around the country in one way or another. At the end of last year, and after many years of involvement and support from local communities and more volunteers than you could possibly count, we finally passed into law the Manhattan Project National Historical Park Act. And it established 3 different educational sites, and I'm thrilled that one of them is Los Alamos, New Mexico, as well as Oak Ridge, obviously, in Tennessee, and Hanford in Washington. And I think these sites will really give visitors from across the country and around the world a much deeper understanding of all that work that occurred 70 years ago. The Manhattan Project National Historical Park will conserve historic sites and artifacts that played a key role in the dawn of the nuclear era, while telling the story of the creation of the world's first atomic bomb and, frankly, exploring its very serious consequences for our society and our planet. Part of our nation's history has been shrouded in secrecy for decades, and it will finally be shared with the public and future generations so that hopefully we might all learn lessons from it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take just a moment to share a little bit of the history of the significant contributions that people from my own state of New Mexico made along the way. In 1939, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the Manhattan Project, and he directed the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to develop atomic weapons. In 1942, it was General Leslie Groves who was placed in charge of the program, and General Groves wanted to establish some sort of central laboratory that was at least 200 miles from our international borders and west of the Mississippi. And that's when Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director, on the Manhattan Project suggested Los Alamos, New Mexico. And in 1943, the Los Alamos National Laboratory was established, which we are still is very active today. Through the extensive collaboration of the scientists at Los Alamos and sites all across the United States, the first successful test detonation of an atomic device happened on July 16, 1945, at the Trinity test site, which is now part of White Sands Missile Range in southern New Mexico. Twice a year we open the Trinity site to visitation. The Manhattan Project was a historical endeavor for our country, and we're still experiencing many of the scientific results of that. The Manhattan Project National Historical Park offers an opportunity, I think, to engage the public in learning about those ramifications. When future generations look back on the 20th century, I think that few events will rival harvesting the power of the atom as a turning point in human history. Having some of the actual properties, the historic sites and the artifacts, like in Los Alamos, where Manhattan Project scientists and engineers achieved this, is absolutely essential. The Manhattan Project also involved thousands of women who joined the workforce, from those adjusting controls of the calutrons at Oak Ridge to scientists involved at the project's highest levels, like physicist Maria Geppert-Mayer, who spent time working at Los Alamos. The Manhattan Project National Historical Park presents an opportunity to reflect on New Mexico, Washington, and Tennessee's contribution to World War II, and frankly, our ongoing nuclear legacy. For decades, historians have debated whether the war would have ended sooner or later without nuclear devices, and I suspect they will continue to debate that. But no one argues whether these developments, whether the creation of the atomic bomb, changed world history, politics, economics, society, all across this planet. The Manhattan Project propelled the United States leadership forward in science and technology in a brand new way, investing in big science with the creation of the national laboratories, places like Los Alamos, Sandia, Oak Ridge, Brookhaven, Argonne, Lawrence Berkeley, and other national laboratories across our country that continue to do amazing work. It produced new fields of nuclear medicine and nuclear power, high-speed computing, genomics, and bioengineering. And it created an avenue where science granted us extraordinary power to shape the world, underscoring the enormous level of responsibility that comes with scientific research and breakthrough discoveries. As many of you in this room know, Dr. Oppenheimer paid a very high price for his resistance to further development of the atomic bomb. After tirelessly serving his nation during the creation of the Manhattan Project, he was tried before the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and accused of disloyalty. Oppie, as he was known to his friends and many in New Mexico, was stripped of his security clearance, which prevented his involvement in future nuclear development discussions. In my view, this case is an example of Washington's political class using science only as a means to an end. As soon as Oppenheimer's expertise was no longer critical, his views were no longer tolerated, and his patriotism was even questioned. During my time in Washington, too often I've seen scientific integrity undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance ideological or sometimes purely political agendas. And as someone who's a trained engineer, I take particular exception to this. I've watched as, frankly, too many of my colleagues in elected office moved from being entitled to their own opinions, something that our democracy absolutely relies upon, to embracing the belief that somehow they are entitled to their own facts. And none of us are entitled to our own facts. Physicists are good at reminding us of this. So I think as more of the files in the matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer are unclassified, we'll learn, obviously, many more details about the back and forth. But in the meantime, I'll share my own opinion. I don't believe that Dr. Oppenheimer was disloyal. I think he was a brilliant scientist, a brilliant American whose chief transgression was very strenuously exercising his opinion, which did not necessarily line up with the superiors at the time. And I believe that his reputation was unfairly tarnished. And that's why I've asked U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz to use his discretion to vacate the Atomic Energy Commission's decision to strip Dr. Oppenheimer of his clearance. In my view, it's an opportunity to right one wrong in what is really an amazing, complex, fascinating, and very American story that is the Manhattan Project. And I want to thank all of you once again for your invitation to mark this 70th anniversary, and to thank everyone who played a part along the way in the creation of this new national park, which will make sure that we hang on to this history, that we tell these stories, that we have the hard discussions. That is what history really is all about. And it's great to be here with all of you to be a part of that. Thank you.